The train lurched to a stop with a hiss of steam and metal, and Eliza Mercer stepped onto the platform of Red Hollow, carrying everything she owned in a battered carpet bag and a bundle wrapped in faded cotton. The bundle squirmed. Inside it, her daughter, 8 months old, with her mother's dark eyes and her father's absence, let out a thin, hungry cry that cut through the afternoon heat like a blade. Eliza shifted the baby to her other hip, her arms already aching. The platform was nearly empty. A few men lingered near the station house, their eyes sliding over her with the kind of interest that made her skin prickle. She kept her chin up and her gaze forward, though her knees felt loose and unsteady. 3 days on a train with a fussy infant and nothing but dried biscuits and worry to sustain her had scraped her nerves raw. She scanned the crowd for a tall man with broad shoulders. That's how Samuel Drummond had described himself in his letters. Hard-working, God-fearing, looking for a good woman to share my life and my land. She'd written back with careful honesty, confessing she was bringing her niece because the child had no one else. He'd agreed. He'd seemed kind, eager even. Now the platform was emptying, and there was no tall man waiting, no one holding a sign, no one looking for her at all. Eliza's stomach clenched. She moved toward the station house, her boots crunching on the gravel, the baby's weight pressing into her ribs. Inside, a clerk sat behind a scarred wooden counter, shuffling papers without looking up. "Excuse me," Eliza said. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. The clerk glanced at her, then at the baby, then back at his papers. "Help you?" "I'm looking for Samuel Drummond. He was supposed to meet me here." The man's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, amusement maybe, or pity. "Drummond left town 2 weeks ago." The words hit her like a fist. "Left?" "Sold his place and headed west. California, I heard. Didn't say much about it." The clerk pulled an envelope from a drawer and slid it across the counter. "Left this for you, though." Eliza stared at the envelope. Her name was scrawled across the front in careless handwriting. She set the baby down on the counter. The child immediately started fussing and tore it open with shaking fingers. Inside was a single folded bill, $5, and a note. "Miss Mercer. Plans changed. Can't marry. Use the money for a ticket back east. Sorry for the trouble." That was it. No explanation. No apology that meant anything, just $5 and the word sorry, as if that could undo the fact that she'd sold every possession she had to afford the trip west. As if it could erase the promises he'd written in letter after letter. Eliza's vision blurred. She crumpled the note in her fist, her breath coming short and fast. The baby was crying now, a steady wail that echoed through the small room. She scooped her daughter up, pressing the child against her chest, trying to soothe her even as her own world tilted sideways. "Is there a boarding house in town?" she asked, forcing the words out. The clerk shrugged. "There's Mrs. Calloway's place on 3rd Street. She might have a room. Might not, depending." "Depending on what?" He looked at her again, slower this time, taking in the worn dress, the squalling baby, the desperation she couldn't quite hide. "Depending on whether she thinks you're respectable." The word landed like a stone. Eliza felt heat flood her face, but she nodded stiffly and turned toward the door. She didn't trust herself to speak. If she opened her mouth, she might scream or sob or both, and she couldn't afford that. Not here. Not in front of strangers who were already measuring her worth. Outside, the afternoon sun beat down without mercy. Red Hollow spread before her in a tangle of dusty streets and weathered buildings. It wasn't much. A general store, a saloon, a church with peeling paint, a livery stable. The kind of town that survived on stubbornness and little else. Eliza walked toward 3rd Street, her bag dragging at her shoulder, the baby heavy in her arms. Mrs. Calloway's boarding house was a narrow 2-story structure with a sagging porch and curtains drawn tight against the heat. Eliza climbed the steps and knocked. No answer. She knocked again, harder this time. The door opened a crack and a sharp-faced woman peered out. "Yes?" "I need a room," Eliza said, "just for a few nights." Mrs. Calloway's gaze dropped to the baby, and her mouth thinned. "I don't take children. She's quiet most of the time. I can pay." "I said no children." The woman started to close the door. "Please?" The word came out raw and ragged. Eliza hated the sound of it, hated the pleading in her own voice, but she had nowhere else to go. "I just need a few days to figure things out. I won't be any trouble." Mrs. Calloway hesitated, her eyes narrowing. Where's your husband? I don't have one. Thought not. The door closed with a decisive click. Eliza stood on the porch, her hand still raised, her mind spinning uselessly. She wanted to pound on the door until the woman opened it again. She wanted to shout that she wasn't what they thought, that she'd been lied to and abandoned just like everyone else who'd ever trusted the wrong person. But what good would it do? The truth didn't matter here. The baby in her arms was all the truth anyone needed. She walked back toward the center of town, her thoughts scattering like startled birds. There had to be somewhere she could stay. Another boarding house, a hotel. Somewhere. But Red Hollow was small, and word traveled fast. By the time she reached the second boarding house, the door was already closed before she knocked. By the third, the woman who answered took one look at her and shook her head. "You're the one from the train," the woman said. Not a question. Eliza didn't answer. She was too tired to lie, and the truth wouldn't help. "Samuel Drummond's intended," the woman continued. "Except he ran off, didn't he? Left you holding the bag." Her gaze flicked to the baby. Or should I say, holding the baby that isn't yours? Eliza's throat tightened. "She's my niece." "Sure she is." The woman's smile was thin and cold. "Either way, I don't have room." The door closed. Eliza stood in the street, the sun sinking lower, the shadows growing longer. Her daughter had finally stopped crying, exhausted into silence, her small body slack against Eliza's chest. The weight of her felt impossibly heavy. Eliza sank onto a bench outside the general store, her legs refusing to hold her any longer. She had $5, a bag of worthless belongings, and a baby who needed feeding. No job, no friends, no family within 1,000 miles. She'd left everything behind for a man who couldn't even be bothered to wait 2 weeks. She thought about getting back on the train, going east. But to where? Her parents had disowned her the moment her pregnancy became impossible to hide. Her sister had married a preacher who wanted nothing to do with scandal. There was no home to go back to, no safety waiting on the other end of the line. A woman passed by with a basket of vegetables, her skirt swishing. She glanced at Eliza, then quickly away, her mouth pursed in disapproval. 2 men stood talking near the saloon, their voices low, their eyes drifting toward her more than once. Eliza felt their judgment like a physical thing, pressing against her skin. "Excuse me." Eliza looked up. A man stood a few feet away, hat in his hands, his expression cautious. He was older than her by a decade, maybe more, with sun-weathered skin and the kind of build that came from years of hard labor. His clothes were clean but worn, his boots scuffed. "You're Miss Mercer," he said. She nodded, wary. "I heard what happened, with Drummond." He shifted his weight, uncomfortable. That was a rotten thing he did. Eliza didn't respond. She didn't trust herself to speak without her voice breaking. "I'm Coulter Hale," the man said. "I run a ranch about 5 miles north of town. I'm not—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I'm not trying to make trouble, but I heard you're looking for a place to stay." "I am." The admission cost her something, but what choice did she have? "I need help at the ranch," Coulter said. "Cooking, cleaning, mending. I can't pay much, but I can offer you a roof and meals. Separate quarters," he added quickly. "Nothing improper." Eliza stared at him, her exhausted mind struggling to process the offer. It sounded too good to be real. Men didn't offer help to women like her without expecting something in return. "Why?" she asked. Coulter met her gaze, and she saw something honest in his eyes. "Because I've been where you are. Not exactly, but close enough. I know what it's like when the whole world decides you're not worth helping." He glanced down at the baby. "And I don't think children should suffer for their parents' mistakes." Eliza's throat ached. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust that someone in this godforsaken town had a shred of decency left. But trust had already cost her everything once. "I don't need charity," she said. "Good," Coulter replied. "Because I'm offering a job." She looked at him for a long moment, weighing her options. She could refuse and spend the night on a bench with her daughter, hoping someone else would take pity on her before the sheriff ran her out of town. Or she could take a chance on this stranger who at least pretended to care. "All right," she said quietly. "I'll come." Coulter nodded. "I'll bring the wagon around." He left, and Eliza sat there holding her daughter, wondering if she'd just made the worst decision of her life or the only one that mattered. The wagon rattled over the uneven road, each bump sending jolts through Eliza's spine. She sat in the back with her bag and the baby, while Coulter drove in silence. The sun was nearly gone now, the sky bleeding orange and red along the horizon. The land stretched out around them, flat and brown and endless, dotted with scrub brush and the occasional twisted tree. "It's not much," Coulter said over his shoulder. "The ranch. But it's solid. And it's quiet." Eliza nodded, though he couldn't see her. She was too tired to make conversation, too wrung out to do anything but hold on and try not to think too hard about what came next. The ranch appeared gradually, a low house with a sagging porch, a barn that had seen better days, a corral with a few horses milling about. It wasn't grand, but it looked sturdy. Lived in. Real. Coulter pulled the wagon to a stop and climbed down. He offered her a hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. Her legs wobbled when she stood, stiff from the ride. "The house is through here," Coulter said, leading her toward the porch. "You and the baby can have the back room. It's small, but it's got a bed and a window. I'll sleep in the barn tonight so you can settle in." "You don't have to." "I do," Coulter said firmly. "You've had a hell of a day. You need space." He opened the door and Eliza stepped inside. The house smelled like wood smoke and coffee. The main room held a table, a few chairs, a stove. It was sparse but clean. Through a doorway she could see another room, her room, she supposed. Coulter showed her where everything was. The pump for water, the pantry, the lamp oil. He spoke in short, efficient sentences, not lingering, not crowding her. When he finished, he nodded toward the back room. "Get some rest," he said. "We'll figure out the details in the morning." Eliza watched him leave, heard his boots on the porch steps, the creak of the barn door. She stood alone in the quiet house, her daughter asleep in her arms, and felt the first faint stirrings of something she didn't dare name. Hope, maybe. Or just the absence of panic. She carried the baby to the back room and laid her down on the narrow bed. The child sighed in her sleep, her tiny fists curling and uncurling. Eliza sat beside her, her hand resting on her daughter's chest, feeling the steady rise and fall of her breathing. For the first time in days, Eliza let herself cry. Not the wild, desperate sobs she'd been holding back, but quiet tears that slipped down her cheeks and dripped onto the faded quilt. She cried for the life she'd lost, for the lies she'd believed, for the man who'd abandoned her without a second thought. She cried because she was so tired she could barely think, and because she didn't know if she'd have the strength to keep going when morning came. But she would. She always did. "Mom." Morning arrived cold and gray. Eliza woke to the sound of a rooster crowing and her daughter fussing for milk. She fed the baby, changed her, then wrapped her in a blanket and ventured into the main room. Coulter was already up, stoking the fire in the stove. He glanced at her when she entered but didn't say anything, just nodded toward the table where he'd set out a pot of coffee and some bread. "Help yourself," he said. Eliza poured herself a cup and sat down, the baby on her lap. The coffee was strong and bitter, and it cut through the fog in her head. She drank it gratefully. "I'll need to go into town later," Coulter said. "Pick up supplies. You're welcome to come if you want, or you can stay here." Eliza thought about the stairs, the whispers, the doors closing in her face. "I'll stay." Coulter nodded. "Fair enough." He left after breakfast, and Eliza spent the morning exploring the house. It was small, but functional. The furniture was old and mismatched. The walls were bare except for a single faded photograph of a woman with kind eyes. Coulter's mother, maybe? Or a sister? Eliza didn't ask. She found a broom and swept the floors. She washed the dishes. She mended a tear in one of Coulter's shirts that she found hanging on a peg. It felt strange to be doing these things for a man she didn't know, but it also felt necessary. He'd given her a place to stay. The least she could do was earn it. When Coulter returned that afternoon, he found her kneading bread dough at the kitchen table, the baby asleep in a crate lined with blankets. "You didn't have to do all this," he said, setting down a crate of supplies. "Yes, I did," Eliza replied. He didn't argue. He just unpacked the supplies and put them away, moving around the kitchen with the ease of someone who'd been doing it alone for a long time. That night they ate dinner together, bread and beans, and a little dried meat. The conversation was halting and awkward. Coulter asked where she was from, and she gave him the shortest answer she could. He asked about the baby, and she repeated the lie about her being a niece. He didn't push. People in town are going to talk, Coulter said eventually, about you being here. Eliza set down her fork. I know. I'm not saying that to scare you. I just want you to be prepared. I'm already prepared, she said quietly. I've been talked about before. Coulter studied her for a moment, then nodded. All right. They finished the meal in silence. The first week passed in a blur of work and exhaustion. Eliza cooked and cleaned and cared for her daughter. Coulter worked the ranch, mending fences and tending livestock. They didn't talk much, but a rhythm developed between them, a quiet understanding that didn't require words. On the 8th day, Coulter came back from town with his jaw tight and his eyes hard. What happened? Eliza asked. He set down a bag of flour with more force than necessary. Nothing. That's not nothing. Coulter turned to face her, and she saw anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. People are saying things. About you, about me, about what we're doing out here. Eliza's stomach twisted. What kind of things? The kind that aren't worth repeating. He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. I told them to mind their own business, but that just made it worse. I should leave, Eliza said. The words came out flat and automatic because it was what she'd been expecting all along. This was temporary. It had always been temporary. No, Coulter said sharply. She blinked at him, startled. You're not leaving, he continued. Not because some bored idiots in town have nothing better to do than gossip. You've got a job here, and you're doing it well. That's all that matters. It matters to them. Then they can stay in town and keep their opinions to themselves. Coulter's voice softened slightly. I'm not going to throw you out because people talk, Eliza. I've lived through worse. She wanted to ask what he meant by that, but she didn't. There were walls between them still, carefully maintained, and she didn't have the right to break them down. Thank you, she said instead. Coulter nodded. Don't thank me. Just keep making that bread. It's the best I've had in years. The corner of her mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. By the second week, the rhythm between them had deepened. Coulter started staying in the house again, sleeping in the front room while Eliza kept the back. It should have been awkward, but somehow it wasn't. They moved around each other like two people who'd been doing this for years instead of days. One evening, as Eliza was washing dishes, Coulter came in from the barn and sat down at the table with a heavy sigh. Long day? She asked. One of the horses threw a shoe. Took me 2 hours to track her down. He rubbed his shoulder, wincing. Eliza dried her hands and turned to face him. You hurt yourself. It's fine. No, it's not. She crossed to him before she could think better of it and placed a hand on his shoulder. He flinched slightly but didn't pull away. She could feel the tension in the muscle, the knots that came from years of hard labor. Let me help, she said quietly. Coulter looked at her, something unreadable in his eyes. Then he nodded. Eliza worked her fingers gently into the tight muscle, feeling him gradually relax under her touch. Neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the soft breathing of the baby asleep in the next room. When she finished, Coulter turned to look at her. Thank you. You keep saying that to me, Eliza replied. Now we're even. He smiled, a real smile, small but genuine. It transformed his face, made him look younger, less careworn. Maybe we are, he said. That night, lying in the darkness of her room, Eliza realized something that both terrified and thrilled her. She was starting to feel safe here. Not just physically safe, but safe in a way she hadn't felt since before her daughter was born. Maybe longer. It was dangerous, that feeling. Safety could be taken away in an instant. She'd learned that lesson more times than she cared to count. But as she listened to the quiet sounds of the house settling around her, she let herself imagine, just for a moment, what it might be like if this wasn't temporary, if this was home. Then she pushed the thought away and closed her eyes, because hope was the most dangerous thing of all. The third week brought rain, not the gentle kind that nourished the earth, but driving sheets that turned the roads to mud and kept everyone indoors. Eliza stood at the window watching water pour off the roof while her daughter crawled across the floor behind her, babbling to herself. Coulter came in from the barn soaked to the bone, his hat dripping. Storm's going to last through tomorrow at least, he said, peeling off his wet coat. Eliza handed him a towel without a word. He took it, their fingers brushing briefly, and she felt that same jolt of awareness that had been growing stronger each day. She turned away quickly, busying herself at the stove. "I'll make soup," she said. "You don't have to—" "I know." They'd been having this same exchange for weeks now. Her insisting on working, him trying to ease her burden. Neither of them willing to admit that it had stopped being about obligation somewhere along the way. The soup simmered while the rain hammered the roof. Coulter sat at the table, attempting to repair a bridle, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. Eliza moved around the kitchen, aware of him in a way that made her nervous. The baby pulled herself up on a chair leg and squealed with delight at her own accomplishment. "She's getting strong," Coulter observed. "Too strong. She'll be walking soon, and then I won't be able to keep up with her." "You'll manage. You always do." The simple confidence in his voice caught her off guard. She looked at him and found him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You don't really know that," she said quietly. "I know enough." The moment stretched between them, heavy with things neither of them knew how to say. Then the baby toppled backward onto her bottom and started crying, and the spell broke. That night, after the baby was asleep and the house had settled into its familiar creaks and sighs, Eliza lay awake thinking about how easy it would be to let herself believe this was real, to pretend that Coulter's steady presence meant something more than pity or duty. But she'd believed in promises before, and look where that had gotten her. The rain continued through the next day and into the evening. By the second night, cabin fever had set in. Coulter paced the main room like a caged animal while Eliza tried to mend a dress that was more holes than fabric. "You're going to wear a groove in the floor," she said. He stopped, running a hand through his hair. "Sorry, I'm not good at being stuck inside." "Neither am I." She set down the dress. "Tell me something." "Like what?" "Anything. Where you're from, how you ended up here. Something that isn't about fence posts or weather." Coulter sat down across from her, his expression guarded. "Not much to tell." "I doubt that." He was quiet for a long moment, and she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he spoke, his voice low. "I was married once. Long time ago." Eliza's hand stilled on the fabric. "What happened?" "She died. Fever took her and the baby both." He said it matter-of-factly, but she heard the old pain underneath. "That was 8 years ago. Been alone since." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. It was a long time ago." He looked at her directly. "That's why I helped you. I remember what it was like when she was sick, how everyone in town suddenly had somewhere else to be. How the only person who came around was the minister, and even he looked like he couldn't wait to leave. Nobody wants to be close to other people's tragedy, makes them remember their own mortality." Eliza absorbed this, understanding him better now. "Is that why you stay out here, away from town?" "Partly. Also because I'm not good with people. Never have been. Out here, I can just be myself without anyone expecting me to be something I'm not." She knew exactly what he meant. "I used to think I was good with people. I was wrong." "You're fine with people. People are the problem." A laugh escaped her before she could stop it, sharp and unexpected. Coulter's mouth quirked upward. "That's the first time I've heard you laugh," he said. "Haven't had much reason to lately." "Fair enough." The rain continued its steady drumming on the roof. The baby made a small sound in her sleep, and both of them turned toward the back room instinctively. When nothing else came, they relaxed again. "Your turn," Coulter said. "Tell me something true." Eliza's throat tightened. She'd been expecting this, dreading it. "What do you want to know?" "Whatever you want to tell me, or nothing, your choice." She appreciated that he didn't push, but the honesty between them felt unbalanced now. He'd shown her a piece of himself. The least she could do was reciprocate, even if it terrified her. "She's not my niece," Eliza said quietly. "The baby. She's mine." Coulter didn't react with shock or disgust. He just nodded slowly. "I figured." "You did?" "The way you hold her, the way you look at her, nobody looks at someone else's child like that." He paused. "Does the father know about her?" "He knew. He didn't care." The bitterness in her voice surprised her. She'd thought she was past that particular anger, but apparently it was still there, waiting just beneath the surface. "He was married. I didn't know until it was too late. When I told him I was pregnant, he gave me $50 and told me to take care of it. I took the money and left town instead. That took courage." It took desperation. There's a difference. No, Coulter said firmly. There isn't. Not when you're protecting someone you love. The simple validation of her choice made her eyes burn. She blinked hard, refusing to cry in front of him again. She'd done enough of that. My parents disowned me, she continued, needing to get it all out now that she'd started. My sister won't speak to me. I sold everything I had to come west because I thought Samuel Drummond was offering me a second chance. Turns out, I'm not very good at judging men. You're talking to me, aren't you? She looked up, startled, and saw the hint of humor in his eyes. Despite everything, she felt her mouth twitch. Jury's still out on you, she said. Fair enough. They sat in comfortable silence after that, the truth hanging between them like a bridge finally built. Eliza felt lighter somehow, as if the weight of her secrets had been crushing her without her realizing it. Does it change anything? She asked finally. Knowing the truth? Coulter met her gaze steadily. Should it? Most people think so. I'm not most people. No, she said softly. You're not. The rain let up the next morning, leaving the world washed clean and smelling of wet earth. Coulter saddled his horse early, preparing for a trip into town. I'll be back by evening, he said. Need anything? Eliza shook her head. Just be careful, the roads will be slick. He nodded, then hesitated. About what you told me last night. You don't have to say anything. I know. But I want you to know that it doesn't change anything, not for me. He left before she could respond, but his words stayed with her all day, warming her from the inside. She was hanging laundry when she heard the wagon. Her first thought was that Coulter had forgotten something, but the horse approaching wasn't his. A woman climbed down, middle-aged and sturdy, with sharp eyes and a mouth set in a thin line. You must be Miss Mercer, the woman said. It wasn't friendly. I am. Eliza set down the wet shirt she'd been pinning. Can I help you? I'm Margaret Pritchard. I run the church auxiliary in town. She said it like it was a position of great importance. I heard you've been staying out here with Mr. Hale. That's right. Unchaperoned. Eliza felt her spine straighten. I work for Mr. Hale. He's been kind enough to provide room and board in exchange. I'm sure he has. The insinuation was clear. That's actually why I'm here. Some of us in town are concerned about the situation. What situation would that be? Margaret's eyes narrowed. Don't play coy with me, girl. An unmarried woman living alone with a man, with a baby that supposedly belongs to your sister. It's unseemly. It reflects poorly on the whole community. The baby is my responsibility, Eliza said carefully, and my living arrangements are between Mr. Hale and myself. That's where you're wrong. When you choose to live in open sin, it becomes everyone's business. Margaret took a step closer, her voice dropping. I know what you are. We all do. And we won't have your kind corrupting our town. Eliza's hands clenched at her sides. I haven't set foot in your town since I arrived. Good. Keep it that way. And if you have any sense, you'll move on before you bring more shame to Mr. Hale than you already have. He's a decent man. He doesn't deserve to be dragged down by some fallen woman and her bastard. The word hit like a slap. Eliza's vision went red at the edges, but she forced herself to remain calm. Get off this property. Gladly. Margaret climbed back into her wagon. But don't say you weren't warned. We don't tolerate your kind here. She drove away, leaving Eliza standing in the yard, shaking with rage and humiliation. The baby started crying from inside the house, as if sensing her mother's distress. Eliza went to her, scooping her up and holding her close. It's all right, she whispered, though she wasn't sure which of them she was trying to convince. We're all right. But they weren't. Margaret Pritchard's visit had made that clear. The town wasn't going to leave them alone, and sooner or later their judgment would cost Coulter more than his reputation. When Coulter returned that evening, he found Eliza subdued and the dinner half prepared. He took one look at her face and set down his parcels. What happened? She told him about Margaret's visit, leaving nothing out. With each word, his expression grew darker. That woman had no right. She had every right, Eliza interrupted. She's protecting her town from scandal. That's what good people do. Good people don't attack someone for trying to survive. Don't they? She turned to face him, exhausted. Coulter, she's right. I'm ruining your reputation. Eventually it's going to affect your business, your standing in the community. You can't afford that. I don't give a damn about my standing in the community. Maybe you should. He crossed the space between them in 3 strides. Listen to me. I knew exactly what I was doing when I offered you this job. I knew people would talk. I didn't care then, and I don't care now. But I care, Eliza said quietly. You've been nothing but kind to me, and I'm repaying you by making you a pariah. You're not making me anything. They're doing that themselves because it's easier to judge than to help. He gripped her shoulders gently. I won't let them chase you off. Do you hear me? She wanted to believe him, but she'd learned the hard way that wanting something didn't make it true. What if it gets worse, she asked. Then we deal with it. Together. The word hung between them. Together, carrying more weight than either of them acknowledged. Eliza nodded slowly, not trusting her voice. Coulter released her and stepped back. I mean it, Eliza. You're not alone in this. But as she lay in bed that night, listening to the house settle around her, she couldn't shake the feeling that Margaret Pritchard's visit was just the beginning. The following week proved her right. Coulter went into town for supplies and came back with only half of what he'd gone for. What happened? Eliza asked. Morrison at the general store wouldn't serve me, said his wife wouldn't approve of him doing business with me anymore. Eliza's stomach sank. Because of me. Because people are idiots. He set down the sparse supplies more forcefully than necessary. I went to the other store, got what we needed. For now. What happens when they refuse too? Coulter didn't have an answer for that. The isolation grew over the following days. Another rancher who'd always been friendly rode past without waving. A supply order Coulter had placed was mysteriously lost. Small things, but they added up, each one a reminder that the town had made its judgment. Eliza watched it happen with growing dread. She'd known this would come, but that didn't make it easier to bear. Every closed door, every cold shoulder was her fault. Her presence was costing Coulter everything, and there wasn't a thing she could do about it except leave. But where would she go? She had no money, no prospects, no one to turn to, and more importantly, she didn't want to leave. She'd started to think of the ranch as home, of Coulter as what? A friend? Something more? She didn't know, and she was afraid to examine it too closely. One afternoon, she was working in the garden, a small plot Coulter had helped her start behind the house, when she heard horses, multiple riders. Her heart kicked up as she straightened, shading her eyes against the sun. 3 men rode into the yard. One of them was the sheriff, a broad man named Tate, who'd always struck her as more politician than lawman. The other 2 she didn't recognize. Miss Mercer, Sheriff Tate said, tipping his hat without dismounting. I need to speak with Mr. Hale. He around? He's in the north pasture. What's this about? Official business. I'll wait. Eliza's hands clenched on the hoe she'd been using. I can fetch him. No need. We'll ride out. They left without another word, and Eliza stood frozen in the garden, dirt under her fingernails and fear rising in her throat. Official business. That couldn't mean anything good. She was pacing the kitchen when Coulter returned an hour later, his face grim. What did they want? She asked immediately. Coulter pulled off his hat and tossed it on the table. There's been complaints. About us. About the impropriety of the situation. What kind of complaints? The kind that suggest I'm keeping you here against your will, or that you're working in a capacity that isn't exactly housekeeping. His jaw tightened. Tate was decent about it. Said he didn't believe a word, but he has to investigate when citizens make formal complaints. Eliza felt sick. What does that mean? It means they're watching us, looking for any excuse to cause trouble. He met her eyes. I told them the truth, that you work for me, that everything is above board, that they can inspect the place anytime they want. And they're going to. Tate's coming back next week with the minister and one of the town council members. They want to verify that you have separate quarters, that everything is proper. This is my fault, Eliza whispered. No, it's theirs. They're the ones twisting something innocent into something ugly. Coulter's voice was hard. I'm not going to let them bully us, Eliza. You've done nothing wrong. I'm an unmarried mother living with a man who isn't her husband. In their eyes, I've done everything wrong. Then their eyes need adjusting. Despite everything, she felt a rush of gratitude for his stubborn loyalty, but gratitude wouldn't protect him from a town determined to see him ruined. The inspection happened on a Thursday. Tate arrived with Reverend Morrison, a thin man with cold eyes, and Thomas Brennan, who owned the bank and half the businesses in town. They walked through the house with the air of men looking for dirt, examining the sleeping arrangements, the kitchen, even the barn. Eliza stood in the yard with her daughter on her hip, watching them violate her home. Because that's what it was now, she realized. Home. Despite everything, despite the uncertainty, this place had become hers in a way nowhere else ever had. When the men emerged, Reverend Morrison wore an expression of deep disapproval. "Everything appears to be in order," Sheriff Tate said reluctantly. "Separate rooms, proper arrangements." "For now," Brennan added, "but appearances can be deceiving." "There's nothing to deceive," Coulter said flatly. "Miss Mercer is my employee, nothing more, nothing less." The lie burned, even though it was technically true. Eliza felt the sting of it, the denial of whatever fragile thing had been growing between them. Reverend Morrison turned his cold gaze on her. "Young woman, you're living in sin. You have a child born out of wedlock, and you're residing under the roof of an unmarried man. The path you're on leads only to damnation. The path I'm on leads to survival," Eliza shot back. "And if that offends your sensibilities, Reverend, you're welcome to offer me an alternative." His eyes narrowed. "The alternative is repentance. Leave this place. Give the child to a proper family who can raise her in righteousness. Return east and seek forgiveness for your transgressions." "Give up my daughter?" Eliza's voice shook with rage. "That's your solution? A bastard child has no future in a civilized community. You're doing her no favors by clinging to her." Coulter stepped forward, his voice dangerously quiet. "Get off my property. Mr. Hale, now." Sheriff Tate cleared his throat. "Let's all stay calm. Reverend, you've made your point. Time to go." The three men mounted their horses. Before leaving, Brennan looked back at Coulter. "You're making a mistake, Hale. This is going to cost you." "Then I'll pay it," Coulter replied. They rode away, leaving behind a silence thick with tension. Eliza stood trembling, her daughter clutched against her chest. Give up her baby. As if she were a piece of property to be handed off to the highest bidder. As if the love between them meant nothing because some preacher said so. "Are you all right?" Coulter asked quietly. "No." Her voice came out raw. "But I will be." He reached out as if to touch her shoulder, then stopped himself. The restraint in the gesture hurt more than she wanted to admit. That night, Eliza couldn't sleep. She kept hearing Reverend Morrison's words, kept seeing the disgust in Brennan's eyes. They wanted her gone. They wanted her broken. They wanted her to disappear so they could go back to pretending people like her didn't exist. She got up and went to the kitchen for water. Coulter was there, sitting at the table in the darkness. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked. "No." She sat down across from him. The moonlight coming through the window painted everything in shades of silver and shadow. Outside, a coyote called in the distance. "I'm sorry," she said, "for all of this." "Stop apologizing. You haven't done anything wrong. I've ruined your life." "My life was already ruined. You just gave it purpose again." She looked up, startled by the raw honesty in his voice. He was watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Coulter, when Sarah died," he continued, "I thought I was done. Figured I'd just work the ranch until I dropped, and that would be that. No point in anything else. Then you showed up, and for the first time in 8 years, I had a reason to come back to the house at night. A reason to give a damn about tomorrow." "That's not fair," she whispered. "You can't put that on me." "I'm not putting anything on you. I'm telling you the truth." He leaned forward. "They can say whatever they want, Eliza. They can inspect, they can judge, they can refuse to do business with me. I don't care. Because having you here is worth all of it." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to let herself hope that maybe, impossibly, something good could come from this disaster of a life she'd been living. But hope was dangerous. Hope got you hurt. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "Nothing you're not willing to give." The answer was so simple, so honest, that it nearly broke her. She'd spent so long being taken from, used, discarded. The idea that someone might want her without demanding payment was almost incomprehensible. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "Neither do I. We'll figure it out." They sat in the darkness, and for the first time since arriving in Red Hollow, Eliza let herself imagine a future that didn't involve running. It terrified her, but it also felt like the first real breath she'd taken in years. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Eliza was hanging laundry when she saw a wagon approaching. Her first instinct was to run inside, but then she recognized the driver, a woman named Sarah Chen, who ran a small farm east of town with her husband. "Good morning," Sarah called out, climbing down with a basket. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," Eliza replied cautiously. "Can I help you with something?" Sarah smiled. It was warm and genuine, the first friendly expression Eliza had seen from anyone in town. "Actually, I came to help you. Heard you might need some supplies. Brought vegetables from our garden and some fabric I thought you might use." Eliza stared at the basket, confused. "I don't understand. Why would you—" "Because what they're doing to you is wrong." Sarah's voice was quiet but firm. "Not everyone in Red Hollow is like Margaret Pritchard and her crowd. Some of us remember what it's like to be judged unfairly." "Thank you," Eliza managed. "That's very kind." "It's basic decency, which apparently is in short supply these days." Sarah glanced toward the house. "If you ever need anything or just want someone to talk to, you're welcome at our place. We're about 3 miles east, near the creek." After Sarah left, Eliza stood holding the basket, something tight in her chest finally loosening. She wasn't completely alone after all. There were still good people in the world. Not many, maybe, but enough. That evening, she told Coulter about the visit. He nodded thoughtfully. "Sarah's good people. She and Chen came from California about 5 years ago. Had a hard time of it at first. People didn't take kindly to them, but they worked hard, kept to themselves, and eventually earned respect." He paused. "She knows what it's like to be on the outside." "Is that what we are? Outsiders?" "We're whatever they decide we are. Question is whether we care." Eliza thought about that. A month ago, she would have said yes. She would have cared desperately what people thought, because their opinion determined whether she ate or starved. But things had changed. She had changed, or maybe she'd just finally stopped pretending to be someone she wasn't. "I'm tired of caring," she said finally. "Good. That's the first step." "First step to what?" "To living your life instead of apologizing for it." The words settled over her like a blanket. She'd spent so long apologizing, to her parents, to her sister, to every person who looked at her with judgment. She was done. "All right," she said, "no more apologizing." Coulter smiled. "There's the fight I knew you had." Over the next 2 weeks, small acts of kindness began appearing. A bag of flour left on the porch with no note. Fresh eggs in the hen house that hadn't been there the night before. Chen rode by one afternoon and mentioned casually that he'd fixed a broken section of fence. No need to thank him. Each gesture was small, easily dismissed. But together they formed a quiet rebellion against the town's judgment. Not everyone was kind. Morrison still refused to sell to Coulter. Margaret Pritchard organized a prayer circle specifically to pray for Eliza's soul, which seemed more like a public shaming than spiritual concern. But for every closed door, there was someone willing to prop one open, if only a crack. Eliza began to relax into the rhythm of the ranch. She learned to make soap, to cure meat, to identify which plants in the garden needed water and which needed culling. Her daughter grew stronger, pulling herself up on furniture and taking wobbling steps. Coulter taught Eliza to ride, and she discovered she had a natural seat. They fell into patterns that felt like partnership rather than employer and employee. One evening in early September, they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the grasslands. The baby was asleep inside, and the world felt peaceful for the first time in months. "Can I ask you something?" Eliza said. "Always." "That day at the station, when you offered me the job, why did you really do it?" Coulter was quiet for a long moment. "Because I saw myself in you." "What do you mean?" "After Sarah died, everyone in town treated me like I was broken, like I was something to be pitied and avoided. Nobody knew what to say, so they said nothing. They let me sink, and I almost drowned." He turned to look at her. "When I saw you on that bench, I saw that same look. That look of someone drowning while everyone walks past. I couldn't let that happen again." "You saved me," she said softly. "No, you saved yourself. I just gave you a place to do it." She reached out and took his hand. It was the first time she'd initiated contact, and she felt him still in surprise. Then his fingers closed around hers, warm and solid. "Thank you," she said. "You're welcome." They sat that way until the stars came out, hands linked, saying nothing because nothing needed to be said. And in that moment, Eliza let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she'd finally found where she belonged. September became October, and the air turned crisp with the promise of winter. The leaves on the cottonwood trees near the creek began their slow transformation to gold, and the morning frost lingered longer on the grass. Eliza had been at the ranch for nearly 3 months, and the raw edges of her arrival had worn smooth with routine and something deeper she was afraid to name. She was kneading bread dough when she heard the commotion outside. Voices raised, the sound of multiple horses. Her hands stilled on the dough, flour dusting her wrists. Through the window, she saw 5 riders in the yard, and Coulter standing between them and the house. She wiped her hands quickly and went to the door, the baby balanced on her hip. The men were dressed for town, but their faces carried an edge that made her stomach clench. "I'm telling you, there's nothing here that concerns you," Coulter was saying, his voice tight with barely contained anger. "That's not for you to decide," Thomas Brennan replied from atop his horse. He was flanked by Morrison and 3 other men Eliza recognized from town. "We've had reports of disturbances, ungodly behavior. We're within our rights to investigate." "You investigated already. Tate cleared us." "Tate isn't here." Brennan's smile was cold. "And the sheriff doesn't speak for the moral character of this community. That's our responsibility." Eliza stepped onto the porch, and every eye turned to her. She felt their judgment like a physical weight, but she kept her spine straight and her chin up. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying across the yard, "if you have business with Mr. Hale, I suggest you state it plainly instead of making veiled accusations." Morrison's face darkened. "Your very presence here is an accusation, Miss Mercer. A decent woman wouldn't be living in sin with a man, parading her illegitimate child for all to see." "I'm not parading anything. I'm trying to survive." "By corrupting a good man and dragging his name through the mud." Brennan gestured at Coulter. "Hale used to be respected in this town. Now he's a laughingstock, all because he took in a woman of loose morals." Coulter took a step forward, his hands clenched at his sides. "Get off my land before I make you." "Is that a threat?" "It's a promise." The tension crackled like lightning about to strike. One of the other men shifted in his saddle, and Eliza saw the glint of a rifle butt. Her heart kicked hard against her ribs. This could turn ugly fast. "Coulter," she said quietly. "Don't." He didn't look at her. "They need to leave." "We'll leave when we're ready," Brennan said. "But understand this, Hale. Your association with this woman is damaging the reputation of Red Hollow. People are starting to wonder what kind of town harbors fallen women and their bastards. Businesses are suffering. Families are concerned about the moral decay." "Then they should look in a mirror," Coulter shot back. "Because the only decay I see is people using faith as a weapon to hurt someone who's done nothing to them." Morrison's face went purple. "How dare you? How dare you?" Coulter interrupted. "You come to my property, insult a woman under my protection, and call it righteousness. You're nothing but a bully with a Bible." The words hung in the air like a gunshot. Eliza saw Morrison's hand move towards something at his belt, and without thinking, she moved down the steps. "Stop," she said loudly. "All of you, just stop." She was shaking, but she forced herself to keep moving until she stood beside Coulter. The baby squirmed in her arms, sensing the tension. "You want me gone," she said, looking at each man in turn. "You've made that clear, but ask yourselves what you're really afraid of. Is it me? Or is it the fact that someone might show kindness without expecting anything in return? Is it the idea that maybe, just maybe, your judgment isn't as righteous as you think it is?" "We don't need lectures on righteousness from a whore," one of the other men spat. Coulter moved so fast Eliza barely saw it. He grabbed the man's boot and yanked hard, sending him tumbling from his horse into the dirt. The man scrambled up, reaching for his rifle, but Coulter was already there, his knee planted in the man's chest and his hand wrapped around the rifle barrel. "Say it again," Coulter said, his voice deadly quiet. "I want to hear you say it again." "Coulter, let him up," Eliza pleaded. "Please." For a long moment, no one moved. Then Coulter released the man and stepped back, though his hands remained fisted at his sides. The man scrambled to his feet, his face red with humiliation and rage. "You'll pay for that, Hale," Brennan said coldly. "All of you will." They rode off in a cloud of dust and fury, leaving Eliza and Coulter standing in the yard. The silence that followed felt heavier than the confrontation itself. You shouldn't have done that, Eliza said quietly. He called you. I know what he called me. I've been called worse. She turned to face him, exhausted. But now you've made an enemy, and for what? My honor? I lost that a long time ago. No, you didn't. They just want you to believe you did. She wanted to argue, but the fight had drained out of her. Instead, she went back inside, her legs unsteady. She put the baby down and sank into a chair, her whole body trembling with delayed fear. Coulter followed her in, closing the door behind him. He stood there awkwardly, as if unsure whether he should stay or give her space. I meant what I said out there, he finally said. Every word. I know, that's what scares me. She looked up at him. You're willing to burn everything down for me, Coulter. Your reputation, your business, maybe even your safety. And I don't understand why. Because you matter. I'm nobody. You're somebody to me. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Neither of them was ready to fully acknowledge. Eliza felt tears prick her eyes and looked away, unwilling to let him see how much those simple words affected her. The week that followed proved Brennan's threat wasn't empty. Word spread through town about the confrontation, but the version people heard bore little resemblance to the truth. In the telling, Coulter had attacked an unarmed man without provocation, while Eliza had stood by smirking. The story grew with each retelling until it became something monstrous and unrecognizable. Chen wrote out 3 days later with a warning. They're talking about running you both out, he said grimly. Some of the men are drinking at the saloon, working themselves up. You need to be careful. Let them come, Coulter said. Don't be stupid. There's at least a dozen of them, and they're angry. You can't fight that many alone. I'm not alone. Chen glanced at Eliza, who was listening from the doorway. No offense, ma'am, but you and a baby aren't going to stop a mob. Then what do you suggest? Coulter asked. Leave, both of you, at least until things cool down. This is my land. I'm not running. Pride's not worth dying for, Hale. But Coulter was unmoved, and Chen left shaking his head. Eliza waited until he was gone before speaking. He's right, she said. We should leave. No. Coulter, be reasonable. I'm being reasonable. If we run now, we'll be running forever. Is that what you want? To spend your life looking over your shoulder, waiting for the next town to chase you out? Better that than watching you die defending me. He crossed to her, taking her gently by the shoulders. I'm not going to die. And neither are you. We're going to stay right here and face whatever comes. Why? Why is this piece of land so important? It's not the land, he said quietly. It's what it represents. It's the first place I felt alive after Sarah died. And it's the first place you've felt safe in years. I won't give that up without a fight. She wanted to argue, but the intensity in his eyes stopped her. He believed what he was saying with every fiber of his being, and maybe, despite everything, she believed it too. That night she barely slept. Every sound outside made her jolt awake, her heart racing. She kept the baby close, ready to run if she heard horses. But the night passed quietly, and dawn came with nothing more sinister than a cool breeze and the distant call of a crow. The harvest celebration was scheduled for the third Saturday in October. It was Red Hollow's biggest event, a chance for ranchers and farmers to sell their goods, for families to socialize, for the whole town to come together before winter closed in. Eliza had no intention of going, but Coulter had other ideas. We should make an appearance, he said over breakfast. Are you insane? They hate us. All the more reason to show up. Let them see we're not afraid. I'm afraid, Eliza said bluntly. And you should be too. I am. But I'm also tired of hiding. We haven't done anything wrong, Eliza. We shouldn't have to act like criminals. She understood what he was saying, but understanding didn't make it less terrifying. Still, a part of her was tired too. Tired of being ashamed. Tired of apologizing. Tired of making herself small to appease people who would never accept her anyway. All right, she said finally. We'll go. The morning of the celebration arrived bright and cold. Eliza dressed carefully in her best dress, the blue one she'd been married in, though she never spoke of that particular detail. She brushed her hair until it shone and pinned it up carefully. The baby wore a little dress that Sarah Chen had brought, white with tiny embroidered flowers. Coulter had cleaned up too, wearing clothes she'd never seen him in before. He looked different out of his work gear, younger somehow, less weathered. When he helped her into the wagon, his hand lingered a moment longer than necessary. The ride into town was quiet. Eliza's stomach churned with anxiety, but she kept her face composed. Whatever happened, she wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her fall apart. The celebration was already in full swing when they arrived. Tables laden with food stretched along Main Street, and people milled about in their Sunday best. Music played somewhere in the distance, fiddles and guitars blending into something cheerful. For a moment, it looked almost inviting. Then they stepped down from the wagon, and the atmosphere changed. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. People turned to stare. The music seemed to falter before picking back up. "Just keep walking," Coulter murmured, his hand at the small of her back. They moved through the crowd, and people parted before them like they were diseased. Eliza kept her eyes forward, her daughter secure in her arms. She could feel the weight of judgment pressing down from all sides, but she refused to bend under it. They stopped at one of the food tables. The woman serving looked up, saw who it was, and her smile vanished. "We'd like 2 plates," Coulter said politely. The woman hesitated, then glanced over her shoulder. Margaret Pritchard stood nearby, her arms crossed and her expression hard. She gave a tiny shake of her head. "I'm sorry," the woman said, not sounding sorry at all. "We're out." "You have a dozen plates right there," Coulter pointed out. "Those are reserved." "For who?" "For decent people." The words were delivered without malice, which somehow made them worse. Eliza felt Coulter tense beside her, but before he could respond, another voice cut through the tension. "Then I suppose we're all indecent, Mrs. Harper." Sarah Chen appeared at Eliza's elbow, her husband close behind. She picked up 2 plates and handed them to Eliza and Coulter. "These aren't reserved, are they?" Mrs. Harper's mouth opened and closed like a fish. "Mrs. Chen, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly. You're being cruel for no reason other than you enjoy it. Now step aside." The small confrontation had drawn attention. More people were watching now, whispering behind their hands. Margaret Pritchard pushed through the crowd, her face tight with disapproval. "This is a community celebration," she said loudly, "for members of the community in good standing." "By whose definition?" Sarah shot back. "Yours? Last I checked, you don't speak for everyone here. I speak for common decency. And common decency says we don't welcome fornicators and their ill-begotten offspring to family gatherings." The word hung in the air like a slap. Eliza felt her face burn, but before she could respond, a new voice joined the fray. "That's enough, Margaret." Sheriff Tate pushed through the crowd, his expression stern. "This is a public celebration. Everyone's welcome, including Mr. Hale and Miss Mercer." "Sheriff, you can't seriously—" "I can and I am. Now either let them eat in peace, or I'll shut this whole thing down for disturbing the peace." Margaret's face went purple, but she stepped back. The crowd murmured, clearly divided. Some looked relieved, others angry. Eliza caught sight of Brennan near the edge of the gathering, his expression calculating and cold. "Thank you, Sheriff," Coulter said quietly. Tate nodded. "Just keeping the peace, that's all." He melted back into the crowd, leaving them standing in an island of space that no one seemed willing to cross. Sarah and Chen stayed close, a silent show of solidarity that meant more than words could express. They ate standing up because no one offered them seats at the communal tables. The food tasted like ash in Eliza's mouth, but she forced herself to chew and swallow. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her retreat. As they ate, Reverend Morrison mounted a small platform that had been erected for speeches. He cleared his throat, and the crowd gradually quieted. "Friends," he began, his voice carrying across the gathering, "we come together today to celebrate the fruits of our labor, to give thanks for the harvest, and to strengthen the bonds of our community." Eliza felt a prickle of unease. Something in his tone suggested this wasn't going to be a simple blessing. "But a community is only as strong as its weakest link," Morrison continued. "And lately, I've been troubled by the erosion of our moral foundation. We have allowed sin to take root among us, and if we don't act, that sin will spread like a poison." Several people in the crowd nodded. Others shifted uncomfortably. "There are those among us who live in defiance of decency," Morrison said, his gaze finding Eliza with laser precision. "Those who flaunt their transgressions and expect us to turn a blind eye. Those who corrupt good men and lead them astray from the path of righteousness." "Oh, here we go," Sarah muttered. Coulter's hand found Eliza's, squeezing gently. She held on like he was the only thing keeping her upright. I'm talking, of course, about the situation at the Hale Ranch, Morrison said baldly. An unmarried woman living with an unmarried man. A child born out of wedlock, raised in an environment of sin. It's a scandal that reflects poorly on all of us, and it's time we addressed it directly. That's my cue, Coulter said, starting forward. Eliza grabbed his arm. Don't, he wants you to react. I don't care what he wants. But before Coulter could move, Morrison continued. I call on Mr. Hale to do the right thing. Either marry the woman properly and legitimize the situation, or send her away. Those are the only two options that preserve both his soul and our community's integrity. The crowd erupted in murmurs. Some voiced agreement, others protest. Eliza felt dizzy, the world tilting sideways. Marry her or send her away. As if those were simple choices. As if her whole existence could be reduced to an ultimatum delivered by a man who knew nothing about her life. I need to leave, she whispered. No, Coulter said firmly. We're not running from this. Coulter, please. But he was already moving toward the platform, pulling her gently along with him. The crowd parted, and suddenly they were standing in front of Morrison, every eye in Red Hollow fixed on them. You want to talk about sin? Coulter said, his voice cutting through the noise. Let's talk about it. The sin of turning away a woman in need. The sin of judging someone without knowing their story. The sin of using faith as an excuse to be cruel. Morrison's eyes narrowed. I'm not being cruel. I'm trying to save your soul. My soul doesn't need saving. What it needs is for you to mind your own business. When your behavior affects the entire community, it becomes everyone's business. How? Coulter demanded. How does Eliza living at my ranch affect anyone here? Does it hurt your crops, sour your milk, make your children sick? Or does it just offend your delicate sensibilities? Several people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. Morrison's face darkened. It offends decency itself, he said. The woman is a sinner, the child is illegitimate, and you, by harboring them, are complicit in their sin. Then I'm complicit, Coulter said flatly, because I'd rather stand with someone who's trying to survive than with people who'd rather see her starve. The crowd erupted again, louder this time. Some people were shouting support, others condemnation. Eliza's head spun with it all. This was spiraling out of control, and she didn't know how to stop it. Then Brennan's voice cut through the chaos. Maybe the Reverend is right. Maybe it's time Mr. Hale made an honest woman of Miss Mercer, assuming, of course, that she's capable of honesty. The insult was clear, and this time Coulter didn't hold back. He lunged toward Brennan, but Chen and another man grabbed him, holding him back. Not worth it, Chen hissed. That's what he wants. Eliza stepped forward, her voice shaking but audible. You want honesty? Fine. Here's the truth. Yes, my daughter was born out of wedlock. Yes, I lied when I came here because I was terrified and alone. Yes, I'm living at Coulter Hale's ranch, working for him in exchange for room and board. If that makes me a sinner in your eyes, so be it. But at least I'm trying to build something better for my child, which is more than I can say for people who spend their days tearing others down. The words poured out of her in a rush, and when they were done, she felt hollowed out and fragile. The crowd was silent now, staring at her with expressions ranging from sympathy to disgust. Margaret Pritchard spoke into the silence. You admit it then. The child is yours, born of fornication and shame. Born of betrayal, Eliza corrected, her voice stronger now. The man who fathered her was married. I didn't know. When I told him I was pregnant, he gave me money to get rid of her. I took the money and ran instead because she deserved better than being erased to preserve someone else's reputation. She looked around at all the judging faces. You all want to know who's really indecent? It's the man who abandoned her. It's the people who turned me away when I had nowhere to go. It's everyone who's more concerned with appearances than actual human suffering. And that's why I took her in, Coulter added, his voice calmer now. Not because I wanted something from her, not because I was looking to sin, but because I knew what it was like to be thrown away by people who should have cared. Reverend Morrison opened his mouth to respond, but Sheriff Tate stepped forward again. I think that's enough public confession for one day, he said. Everyone said their piece. Now let's get back to celebrating before this turns into something we'll all regret. The crowd slowly began to disperse, though the murmuring continued. Some people looked thoughtful. Others looked angry. A few women who'd been standing near the back approached Eliza hesitantly. That took courage, one of them said quietly. What you did. Eliza didn't feel courageous. She felt exposed and vulnerable, like she'd peeled her skin off in public. But she nodded her thanks. They didn't stay long after that. Coulter retrieved the wagon, and they climbed in without speaking. Sarah squeezed Eliza's hand before they left. "You did good," she said. But as they rode back to the ranch in the fading afternoon light, Eliza wasn't sure she'd done anything good at all. She'd put herself and Coulter in the spotlight, made them a target for everyone's judgment. And for what? So people could know the truth? The truth hadn't set her free. It had just given them more ammunition. "You're thinking too loud," Coulter said eventually. "I ruined everything." "You told the truth. There's a difference." "The truth just made things worse. Maybe. Or maybe it needed to be said." He glanced at her. "Either way, we're in this together now. No more secrets." No more secrets. The words should have been comforting, but all Eliza felt was a deep, bone-tired exhaustion. The baby had fallen asleep in her arms, oblivious to the storm her mother had just created. Eliza envied her that innocence. When they reached the ranch, the sun was setting in a blaze of orange and red. Coulter helped her down from the wagon, and for a moment they stood there in the yard, neither quite ready to go inside and face the silence waiting for them. "What Morrison said," Coulter began carefully. "About marrying you or sending you away." Eliza's heart stuttered. "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to, but what if I wanted to?" She stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. "You can't be serious." "Why not?" "Because people don't marry out of obligation. Because you'd regret it. Because I won't trap you into something you don't really want." "Who says I don't want it?" The question hung between them, heavy and frightening. Eliza shook her head. "You don't know what you're saying. You're angry and trying to prove something to them." "I'm not trying to prove anything to them. Maybe to you, though." He stepped closer. "Eliza, I'm not good at this. Words aren't my strength, but these past few months, having you here, it's been the first time since Sarah died that I felt like I'm actually living instead of just existing. That's not love, that's gratitude. Maybe it started as gratitude, but it's not that anymore." She wanted to believe him. Every fiber of her being wanted to believe that someone could want her, not despite what she'd done, but including it. But years of disappointment had taught her to be cautious with hope. "You don't have to answer now," Coulter said. "I'm not proposing. Not yet, anyway. I'm just telling you that when Morrison gave that ultimatum, the choice was easy. I'm not sending you away. Which means eventually, if you'll have me, I'd like to make this arrangement permanent." "Why?" The word came out raw. "Why would you tie yourself to someone the whole town hates?" "Because the town doesn't matter. You do." The simple honesty of it broke something inside her. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them, and Coulter pulled her close, careful not to crush the baby between them. Eliza let herself lean into him, let herself take the comfort he offered, even though she was terrified of what it might cost both of them. They stood that way as darkness fell, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called. The sound was lonely and wild, and Eliza understood it perfectly. She'd been lonely and wild for so long, but maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to be anymore. That night changed something between them, though neither spoke of it directly. The days that followed the harvest celebration fell into a rhythm that felt both familiar and entirely new. Coulter still worked the ranch from dawn until dusk, and Eliza still cooked and cleaned and cared for her daughter. But now there were moments, small, quiet moments, where their hands would brush and linger, where their eyes would meet across the room and hold for a beat too long. The town's reaction to their public confession was mixed and messy. Some people, emboldened by Eliza's honesty, began to soften. A few women nodded to her when Coulter took her into town for supplies. Others remained steadfast in their condemnation, crossing the street to avoid them entirely. 3 days after the celebration, a letter arrived. Coulter brought it in from town, his expression unreadable as he handed it to Eliza. The envelope was thick, official-looking, with a law office's name embossed in the corner. "What is it?" she asked, her stomach nodding. "I don't know. It's addressed to you." Eliza's hands shook as she opened it. The legal language swam before her eyes, but certain words jumped out with brutal clarity. Estate, deceased, inheritance, Samuel Drummond. She read it twice before the meaning fully penetrated. Then she sat down heavily at the kitchen table, the letter slipping from her fingers. "Eliza?" Coulter's voice came from far away. "What does it say?" "He's dead," she said numbly. Samuel Drummond, the man who was supposed to marry me. He died 3 weeks ago in California. I'm sorry. Don't be. I'm not. She picked up the letter again, forcing herself to focus. He left property here, in Red Hollow, a house and some land on the east side of town, and money. Not a fortune, but enough to live on for a while. The silence that followed was heavy with implications neither of them wanted to voice. That's good, Coulter said finally. That's good news. Is it? Of course it is. You'll have independence, security. You won't have to depend on anyone. The words were right, but something in his voice was off. Eliza looked up and saw the careful blankness in his expression, the way he was holding himself very still. You think I'm going to leave, she said. I think you have options now. That's all I'm saying. And if I don't want options? He met her eyes then, and she saw the vulnerability he was trying to hide. Then you're a fool. You should take the house and the money and start fresh somewhere nobody knows your story. Is that what you want? What I want doesn't matter. This is about what's best for you and your daughter. Eliza stood, anger flaring hot in her chest. Don't do that. Don't decide what's best for me without asking what I actually want. What do you want? He asked, his voice rough. I want to stay here, with you. I want what you talked about the other night, even though it terrifies me. I want to stop running and actually build something that lasts. You say that now, but what? You think I'm going to change my mind the second I have money? That I'm just here because I had no other choice? She crossed to him, forcing him to look at her. I could have left weeks ago. Could have begged my way onto a train, found work in another town, made it on my own somehow, but I stayed, not because I was trapped, but because I wanted to. Why? The question was barely a whisper. Eliza took a breath, steadying herself for the leap she was about to take. Because you make me feel safe. Not just physically safe, but safe enough to be myself without apologizing for it. And because when I imagine the future, the only version that doesn't make me want to run is the one where you're in it. Coulter stared at her for a long moment. Then, without warning, he pulled her into his arms and kissed her. It wasn't gentle or tentative. It was fierce and desperate, like he was drowning and she was air. Eliza kissed him back with equal intensity, her hands fisting in his shirt, years of loneliness and fear pouring out in that single moment of connection. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. That was, Coulter began. Long overdue, Eliza finished. He laughed, and the sound was rough, but genuine. Yeah, it was. They stood there, foreheads touching, neither quite ready to let go. Then the baby started fussing from the other room, and reality crashed back in. I should... Eliza gestured vaguely toward the bedroom. Right. Yeah. She went to tend to her daughter, her lips still tingling, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it. Behind her, she heard Coulter let out a long breath, and she smiled despite everything. The next morning brought another visitor. Eliza was hanging laundry when she saw a buggy approaching, driven by a man in a dark suit. He climbed down with the careful precision of someone unused to ranch work, carrying a leather case. Miss Mercer? He called out. Yes? I'm Howard Garrett, attorney at law. I represent the estate of Samuel Drummond. I need to discuss the terms of his bequest. Coulter emerged from the barn, his expression wary. Garrett glanced at him, then back at Eliza. Perhaps we could speak inside. They gathered around the kitchen table, Garrett pulling papers from his case with methodical efficiency. He went through the details of Drummond's estate. The house, which was modest but in good condition, the land, which was suitable for farming or could be sold, and a sum of money that made Eliza's eyes widen. It's not a fortune, Garrett said, but invested wisely, it should provide a comfortable living for several years, perhaps longer if you're frugal. Why did he leave it to me? Eliza asked. He abandoned me. Garrett's expression was professionally neutral. I couldn't say. The will was drawn up shortly before his death. Perhaps he felt some obligation to make amends. Amends, Eliza repeated flatly. He thought money would make up for leaving me stranded in a strange town with nothing. I'm simply here to execute the terms of the will, Miss Mercer. What you do with the inheritance is entirely your decision. He pushed a set of papers across the table. You'll need to sign these to claim the property. I can arrange for the funds to be transferred to an account in your name. Eliza looked at the papers but didn't touch them. Beside her, Coulter was silent, his jaw tight. "Can I think about it?" she asked. Garrett looked surprised. "You want to think about accepting an inheritance?" "Yes. It's quite irregular, but I suppose there's no rush. The property isn't going anywhere." He gathered his papers. "I'll be at the hotel in town for the next few days if you need me." After he left, Coulter and Eliza sat in thick silence. The baby crawled across the floor between them, babbling happily, oblivious to the tension. "You should take it," Coulter said finally. "I know. So why didn't you sign?" Eliza struggled to put her feelings into words. "Because once I sign those papers, everything changes. I stop being the woman who has nothing and becomes the woman who has choices. And choices are complicated. Choices are freedom." "Are they?" She looked at him. "What if I don't want to be free? What if I want to be tied to something, to someone, in a way that means something?" "You can be tied to something and still be free, Eliza. That's what partnership is. Is that what this is? A partnership?" "I thought so, or at least I hoped it could be." The baby pulled herself up on a chair leg and took 2 wobbling steps before falling onto her bottom. She looked surprised, then pleased with herself. Both adults smiled despite the heavy conversation. "She'll be walking soon," Eliza said softly. "Yeah. I want her to grow up here. On this ranch. I want her to have space to run and fresh air to breathe. I want her to have a father who'll teach her to ride and to be strong." She paused. "I want her to have the life I never did." Coulter reached across the table and took her hand. "Then stay. Sign the papers, take the inheritance, and stay anyway. Not because you have to, but because you choose to. And if the town never accepts us, then we build our own world out here. Just the 3 of us." It sounded simple when he said it like that. Like love and determination could be enough to overcome years of judgment and prejudice. Eliza wanted to believe it could be that easy, but she'd learned the hard way that nothing ever was. That afternoon, she walked the property alone while Coulter watched the baby. She needed space to think, to process what the inheritance meant and what she wanted to do with it. The land stretched out around her, brown and endless under the pale November sky. Winter was coming. She could feel it in the bite of the wind, in the way the grass crunched under her boots. She thought about the house in town, sitting empty and waiting. She could move there, raise her daughter in relative comfort, become just another widow trying to make her way. It would be easier than staying here, fighting a battle that might never be won. But easier wasn't always better. When she returned to the house, she found Coulter on the porch, whittling a piece of wood. The baby was asleep in a basket beside him, wrapped in blankets against the cold. "I'm going to sign the papers," Eliza said. Coulter's knife stilled. "All right. But I'm not leaving." He looked up, hope and fear warring in his expression. "You're sure?" "No, but I've never been sure of anything in my life, and that didn't stop me before." She sat down beside him. "I want to use the money to fix up this place. Make it more than just a ranch. Maybe we could take in other women who need help. Women like me, with nowhere else to go." Coulter considered this. "That's a big undertaking." "So is everything else we're doing." "Fair point." He set down the wood and knife. "You really want to do this? Build something here together?" "I really do, if you'll have me." "I asked you first," he reminded her with a slight smile. "Then I guess we're both asking." He leaned in and kissed her, softer this time, but no less meaningful. When they pulled apart, the baby stirred in her sleep, and they both looked down at her. "She's going to need a name," Coulter said. "You can't keep calling her the baby forever." Eliza had been avoiding naming her daughter, as if keeping that distance might somehow protect them both, but protection through distance was a lie she'd been telling herself for too long. "Grace," she said. "Her name is Grace." "Grace?" Coulter tried it out. "That's good. It suits her." "It suits." 2 days later, Eliza rode into town with Coulter to sign the papers. Howard Garrett was waiting at his hotel, and the process was surprisingly quick. A few signatures, a few witnesses, and suddenly Eliza owned property and had money in her name. "Congratulations, Miss Mercer," Garrett said. "You're a woman of means now." The words felt strange. Woman of means. As if money could change who she fundamentally was. They walked out of the hotel into the bright afternoon, and Eliza felt eyes on them from every direction. Word had spread, as it always did in small towns. Everyone knew about the inheritance now, and they were watching to see what she would do with it. Want to see the house? Coulter asked. Might as well. They walked through town, drawing stares and whispers. The house was on the eastern edge, a modest two-story structure with a wraparound porch and peeling paint. It looked sad and neglected, like it had been waiting for someone to care about it. The key turned stiffly in the lock, and the door swung open on creaking hinges. Inside, dust motes danced in the sunlight streaming through dirty windows. The furniture was covered with sheets, giving the whole place a ghostly quality. It needs work, Coulter observed. Everything needs work. Eliza moved through the rooms, imagining them filled with women and children, imagining purpose beyond simple survival. But it has good bones. With some cleaning and repairs, it could be something special. You're really serious about this, the refuge idea. Why not? I have the space and the money to make it happen, and maybe if we help enough people, the town will eventually see us as something other than scandalous. Or maybe they'll just have more reasons to hate us. Maybe, but I'd rather do something useful with my second chance than waste it worrying about what people think. They stood in the empty parlor, dust settling around them, and Eliza felt a strange sense of rightness. This house represented everything she'd lost: security, respectability, a place in society. But instead of reclaiming those things for herself, she could offer them to others who needed them more. The decision crystallized in her mind with sudden clarity. She would keep the ranch as home, but this house would become something bigger, a place where broken women could come to be put back together, where judgment ended and healing began. I'm going to need help, she said, getting it ready, running it, making sure it's actually useful, and not just another place for people to feel ashamed. You'll have it, Coulter said immediately. Whatever you need. I was thinking we should talk to Sarah and Chen, maybe some of the other folks who've been kind. Build a network of people who actually care. That's a good idea. They locked up the house and headed back toward the wagon. As they walked, Margaret Pritchard stepped out of the general store, her arms full of packages. She saw them and stopped dead. Miss Mercer, she said coldly, I heard about your good fortune. Did you? Eliza kept her voice neutral. Yes. Quite the windfall for someone in your position. Margaret's eyes were sharp with calculation. I suppose you'll be leaving our little town now, taking your inheritance somewhere more accommodating. Actually, I'm staying. Margaret's smile faltered. Staying? That's right. I'm going to fix up the house and use it to help other women who find themselves in difficult circumstances, women who might otherwise have nowhere to turn. You can't be serious. Completely serious. Margaret's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Shock, anger, something that might have been fear. Red Hollow doesn't need that kind of establishment. We're a decent community. Then you have nothing to worry about, Eliza said pleasantly. Decent communities take care of their own, don't they? She walked past Margaret before the woman could formulate a response, Coulter close behind her. They didn't speak until they were in the wagon and heading out of town. You enjoyed that, Coulter observed. Maybe a little. She's going to make trouble. She was already making trouble. At least now I have the resources to push back. The conversation about marriage came up again a week later, during a cold evening when frost had turned the world silver. They'd put Grace to bed and were sitting by the fire, Eliza mending one of Coulter's shirts while he cleaned his rifle. We should do it soon, Coulter said abruptly. Eliza looked up from her stitching. Do what? Get married. Before winter sets in proper. Her hands stilled. That's a very romantic proposal. He set down the rifle, his expression sheepish. Sorry, I'm not good at this. You're doing fine, she set aside the mending. But are you sure? Once we do this, there's no going back. We'll be tied together in the eyes of everyone. That's the point. What if you wake up one day and regret it? What if you do? Eliza considered the question seriously. I don't think I will, but I'm terrified I'll disappoint you, that you'll realize I'm not what you thought, and you'll wish you'd chosen differently. Coulter moved from his chair to sit beside her on the floor, taking her hands in his. Eliza, I'm not choosing blind. I've seen you at your worst, scared, angry, falling apart, and I'm still here, still wanting this. You're not going to disappoint me by being human. You say that now. I'll say it in 10 years too. He squeezed her hands. Marry me. Not because the town expects it, or because it's convenient. Marry me because we make sense together, because you steady me and I steady you, because Grace deserves two parents who chose each other, not just circumstances. Tears pricked Eliza's eyes. That's the most words I've ever heard you string together at once. Don't get used to it, she laughed through the tears. Yes. Yes? Yes, I'll marry you. On one condition. Name it. We do it small. Just us and whoever we actually care about. No big town spectacle, no performance for people who hate us anyway. I can live with that. They told Sarah and Chen first over dinner at the ranch 2 nights later. Sarah's face lit up with genuine joy. Finally, she said, I was wondering when you two would figure it out. Was it that obvious? Eliza asked. Only to anyone with eyes. Sarah raised her glass. To new beginnings. They drank to that, and the conversation turned to logistics. The wedding would be at the ranch in 3 weeks, just before December. Sarah would stand with Eliza, Chen with Coulter. Sheriff Tate agreed to perform the ceremony. He had the authority, and he'd proven himself more fair-minded than most. The days leading up to the wedding passed in a blur of preparation. Eliza cleaned the house from top to bottom, made a new dress from fabric Sarah helped her choose, practiced her vows 100 times in her head. Coulter was less obviously nervous, but she caught him pacing the barn late at night, working through his own thoughts. The hardest part was telling Grace, even though the baby was too young to understand. Eliza held her daughter close one evening and whispered the truth. We're going to be a real family, she said softly. You're going to have a father who will love you like you deserve. And maybe, if we're very lucky, the world will be a little kinder to you than it was to me. Grace grabbed her mother's nose and giggled, and Eliza took it as approval. 3 days before the wedding, trouble found them again. Eliza was in town picking up supplies when she overheard 2 women talking outside the dry goods store. Did you hear? She's actually going through with it. Shameful. That poor man, shackling himself to a woman like that. And the child. What kind of life will she have, growing up with everyone knowing her mother's history? Someone should talk sense into him before it's too late. Eliza stepped around the corner, making her presence known. Both women had the grace to look embarrassed, though neither apologized. If you have something to say about me, Eliza said evenly, say it to my face. I'm tired of whispers. One of the women, a younger woman named Catherine, who'd always struck Eliza as more follower than leader, actually looked ashamed. We didn't mean— Yes, you did. You mean every word. Eliza looked at both of them. I'm marrying Coulter Hale in 3 days. You're not invited, but I wanted you to know that no matter what you think of me, I'm not going anywhere. This is my home now, and I'm going to make it a better place whether you like it or not. She walked away before they could respond, her heart pounding but her head high. When she got back to the ranch, Coulter took one look at her face and pulled her into his arms. What happened? She told him, and he just held her tighter. 3 more days, he said. Then you'll be stuck with me officially. I'm counting on it. The wedding day dawned cold and clear, the sky that particular shade of blue that only comes in late autumn. Eliza woke early and dressed carefully in her new dress, a simple blue cotton that Sarah had helped her make. It wasn't fancy, but it was hers, bought with her own money and sewn with her own hands. Sarah arrived early to help with her hair, pinning it up with small white flowers she'd somehow found despite the season. You look beautiful, Sarah said. I look nervous. That too. Sarah squeezed her shoulder. But it's the good kind of nervous, the kind that means you're about to do something that matters. They gathered in the main room of the house at noon. Sheriff Tate stood by the fireplace in his best suit, looking uncomfortable but sincere. Chen stood beside Coulter, who wore clothes Eliza had never seen before, dark pants and a white shirt that made him look younger and more vulnerable. Grace sat in Sarah's arms, remarkably quiet, as if she understood the importance of the moment. There were a few others present, a rancher named Williams and his wife who'd shown them kindness, a clerk from the land office who'd defied Morrison to process Eliza's inheritance paperwork, and surprisingly, Howard Garrett, the lawyer, who'd asked politely if he might attend. We're gathered here, Tate began, then stopped and cleared his throat. Actually, I'm not much for fancy speeches, so I'll just say this. Marriage is about choosing someone every day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. And I figure if 2 people can stand together through what you 2 have faced, they can make it through just about anything. He went through the standard vows, and Coulter and Eliza repeated them, their voices steady despite the emotions churning beneath the surface. When it came time for the rings, Chen produced two simple gold bands that Coulter had commissioned weeks ago, even before the engagement was official. "I knew I'd need them eventually," he admitted quietly as he slipped one onto Eliza's finger. She did the same for him, her hand shaking slightly. The ring looked strange on his work-roughened hand, but also right, like it had always belonged there. "Then by the authority vested in me," Tate concluded, "I pronounce you husband and wife. Coulter, you can kiss your bride." Coulter did, and it was gentle and sweet and perfect. When they pulled apart, the small group erupted in applause. Grace clapped too, mimicking the adults, and everyone laughed. They ate a simple meal together: roasted chicken, vegetables from Sarah's garden, bread that Eliza had baked that morning. The conversation flowed easily, full of laughter and warmth. For a few hours, it was possible to forget that outside these walls, a town still judged them harshly. As the sun set and their guests began to leave, Sarah pulled Eliza aside. "You did good," she said. "You found something real." "I got lucky. Luck had nothing to do with it. You fought for this. Don't forget that." After everyone left, Coulter and Eliza stood in the quiet house, Grace asleep in her crib. The fire had burned down to embers, and the whole world felt suspended in that moment between day and night. "Mrs. Hale," Coulter said, testing out the name. "That's going to take some getting used to." "We have time." He was right. They had time. Not just tonight, but tomorrow and the day after, and all the days stretching out ahead of them. It was both thrilling and terrifying to think about. They went to bed as husband and wife for the first time, and if either of them was nervous, it didn't matter. What mattered was the choice they'd made, the commitment they'd spoken aloud in front of witnesses. Everything else would figure itself out. The next morning brought reality crashing back. Coulter went into town for supplies and returned with his jaw tight and his eyes hard. "They know," he said. "Of course they know. We didn't exactly keep it secret. Morrison preached a whole sermon about us, about how we're corrupting the community by pretending our sin is legitimate just because we signed some papers." Eliza felt the familiar anger rise but tamped it down. "Let him preach. We know the truth. He's organizing something. I heard talk at the store. Some kind of petition to have you evicted from the house in town." "Can they do that?" "I don't know. Maybe. If enough people sign." The joy of the wedding evaporated, replaced by the cold reality of their situation. They were married now, but that didn't erase the past or change the town's opinion. If anything, it seemed to have made things worse. "We'll fight it," Eliza said. "We'll get our own lawyer if we have to. That house is legally mine. They can't just take it. They can make our lives hell trying. Then let them try. I'm done running, Coulter. I'm done letting other people's hate dictate what I'm allowed to do." He pulled her close, and they stood there drawing strength from each other. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the first hints of winter. Hard times were coming, but for the first time in her life, Eliza felt ready to face them. The petition arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a nervous clerk who wouldn't meet Eliza's eyes. 43 signatures, all demanding that she be prohibited from operating any kind of establishment in Red Hollow that might encourage immoral behavior and attract undesirable elements to our community. Eliza read it twice, her hand steady even as her stomach churned. Coulter stood behind her, reading over her shoulder, his breath warm against her neck. 43 people, she said quietly. That's almost half the town. It's also less than half. Is that supposed to make me feel better? No, but it's the truth. He took the petition from her hands and set it on the table. What do you want to do? Eliza thought about that question. A month ago, she would have crumbled, would have packed her things and disappeared into the night, too ashamed to fight back. But she wasn't that woman anymore. Marriage hadn't changed her, but it had given her something to stand on besides fear. I want to finish what I started, she said. I want to open that house and help people. And I want to do it in a way that makes it impossible for them to ignore the good we're doing. That's going to take money and time and a lot of patience you don't have. She smiled despite everything. I have some money now, and I'm learning patience. Sort of. Over the next 2 weeks, they threw themselves into preparing the house. Coulter hired 2 men from out of town, workers who didn't care about Red Hollow's gossip, to help with repairs. They fixed the sagging porch, replaced broken windows, patched the roof. Eliza cleaned every surface until it gleamed, scrubbing away years of neglect and sadness. Sarah came most days to help, bringing supplies and encouragement. Other allies appeared too, women who'd been quietly sympathetic but too afraid to speak up before. They brought furniture, linens, dishes, small contributions that added up to something substantial. "What are you calling it?" Sarah asked one afternoon as they hung curtains in what would be the main sitting room. Eliza had been thinking about that. Harbor House, because that's what it is. A safe harbor for people caught in storms they didn't create. I like it. Simple, clear. Think anyone will actually come? They'll come. Women always know where to find help when they're desperate enough to look. The real test came in early December, just as the first snow began to fall. Eliza was at the ranch preparing dinner when Coulter came in from town with unusual urgency. "There's a woman at Harbor House," he said. "She showed up about an hour ago, young, maybe 18. She's got a black eye and she's pregnant." Eliza's heart lurched. She'd known this moment would come eventually, but she hadn't expected it so soon. "Is she alone?" "For now, but she's scared, keeps looking over her shoulder like she expects someone to drag her back." Eliza grabbed her coat. "Watch Grace. I need to go." The ride into town felt endless. By the time she reached Harbor House, dusk was settling over Red Hollow, painting everything in shades of gray and blue. The front door was unlocked, and inside she found a girl, because that's what she was, just a girl, sitting on one of the new chairs, her arms wrapped around herself. "Hello," Eliza said softly. "I'm Eliza Hale. This is my house." The girl looked up, and Eliza saw terror mixed with desperate hope. "I didn't know where else to go. Someone said you might help people like me. What's your name?" "Annie. Annie Graves." Eliza sat down across from her, moving slowly like she might with a frightened animal. "Tell me what happened, Annie." The story came out in fits and starts. Annie had been working as a maid for a wealthy family in the next county. The son of the house had forced himself on her, and when she turned up pregnant, they'd thrown her out without references or pay. She'd been wandering for 2 weeks, sleeping in barns and begging for food, before someone mentioned Harbor House. "He said I tempted him," Annie whispered, touching her bruised eye. "His father hit me and called me names I won't repeat. Then they put me on the road with nothing." Rage built in Eliza's chest, hot and righteous. She'd heard this story before, lived a version of it herself. Men took what they wanted and women paid the price, over and over, while everyone pretended it was somehow their fault. "You're safe here," Eliza said firmly. "You can stay as long as you need. No one's going to hurt you or throw you out." "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." "Because someone should have helped me when I needed it, and because no woman deserves what happened to you." Annie started crying then, great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. Eliza moved to sit beside her, putting an arm around her thin shoulders and letting her cry. Sometimes tears were the only language that made sense. They stayed like that until the sobbing subsided. Then Eliza showed Annie to one of the upstairs rooms, helped her wash up, and brought her food from the kitchen stores they'd stocked. The girl ate like she was starving, which she probably was. "There's going to be talk," Annie said between bites, "about me being here." "Let them talk. They were already talking anyway." "Won't that make trouble for you?" "I'm already in trouble. Might as well make it count for something." By the time Eliza returned to the ranch that night, word had spread. A fallen woman staying at Harbor House. Proof, Morrison and his followers said, that Eliza was exactly what they'd always claimed. A corrupting influence attracting sin and scandal. "They're calling for the sheriff," Coulter reported grimly, "saying you're harboring a criminal." "What crime did Annie commit? Being attacked?" "They're saying she stole from her employers, that she's a thief as well as a whore." Eliza felt exhaustion settle over her like a heavy blanket. Of course they are, because it's easier to believe she stole than to admit what really happened. Tate won't arrest her without proof, but Morrison's stirring people up. There might be trouble. Then we'll face it. But privately, Eliza worried. She'd expected resistance, but this felt different, more organized, more dangerous. People didn't just dislike what she was doing, they were afraid of it. Afraid that if Harbor House succeeded, it might expose all the ugly truths they'd been ignoring. The confrontation came 2 days later. Eliza was at Harbor House teaching Annie to make bread when she heard horses outside. Multiple horses. Her stomach dropped. Through the window, she saw Morrison leading a group of about 15 men, all grim-faced and determined. Thomas Brennan rode beside him, and several others she recognized from the petition. "Stay upstairs," Eliza told Annie. "No matter what you hear, don't come down." "What are they going to do?" "I don't know, but I won't let them hurt you." She stepped onto the porch as the men dismounted. Morrison approached first, holding what looked like official papers. "Miss Mercer." "Excuse me, Mrs. Hale," he said with false courtesy. "We're here on official business." "What business?" "This house is being used for immoral purposes. We have affidavits from citizens attesting to illegal activity on the premises." "What illegal activity? Giving shelter to someone in need?" "Harboring a known thief and prostitute," Brennan cut in. "We have a right to inspect the premises and remove any undesirable persons." "You have no such right. This is private property, legally owned by me. You're trespassing." Morrison's expression hardened. "We're trying to do this peacefully, Mrs. Hale, but if you continue to obstruct justice, we'll have no choice but to use force." "Force against what? A woman trying to help another woman? Listen to yourselves. You sound like thugs, not righteous men." "We're protecting this community from your corrupting influence," Morrison said. "Now step aside." "No." The single word hung in the cold air. Several men shifted uncomfortably, but Morrison and Brennan stood firm. "Then we'll move you aside," Brennan said, gesturing to two of the larger men. They started forward, and Eliza's heart hammered in her chest. She was one woman against 15 men. There was no way she could physically stop them. But she stood her ground anyway, because sometimes standing up was all you had. "That's far enough." The voice came from behind the men. They turned to find Coulter approaching on horseback, with Sheriff Tate beside him. Behind them came Chen, Sarah's husband, and at least a dozen other people. Ranchers, farmers, even a few townspeople Eliza recognized. "What's this about, Morrison?" Tate asked, dismounting. "We're here to inspect this property for illegal activity." "On whose authority?" "The community's authority. We have affidavits." "I've seen your affidavits. They're garbage." Tate pulled out his own papers. "What you're doing right now is called trespassing and attempted intimidation, and I'm going to have to ask you to leave before I arrest the lot of you." Morrison's face went purple. "You can't be serious. We're trying to uphold decency." "Oh, you're trying to bully a woman who's done nothing wrong. There's a difference." Tate looked at Brennan. "You especially should know better. You're a businessman. You understand property rights. This is Mrs. Hale's property, legally purchased and paid for. What she does with it is her business, not yours." "But she's corrupting our town. She's helping people. If that's corruption, then we need more of it." Tate turned to the assembled crowd. "Any man here who tries to enter that house without Mrs. Hale's permission will spend the night in jail. That clear enough?" Several of Morrison's followers exchanged glances. Without the sheriff's support, their righteous crusade looked a lot more like a mob. One by one, they began backing toward their horses. Morrison remained defiant. "This isn't over. We'll find another way." "Maybe you should spend less time finding ways to hurt people and more time examining why you're so threatened by compassion," Coulter said coldly. "Because, from where I'm standing, the only thing corrupting Red Hollow is you." The two men stared at each other. Years of tension and differences crystallized in that moment. Then Morrison turned and mounted his horse. "You're making a mistake, all of you," he said to the crowd. "Supporting this woman in her house of sin will bring ruin to Red Hollow." "The only ruin I see is what you're trying to cause," Sarah Chen called out. She'd ridden up with several other women, forming a protective barrier around Harbor House. "Mrs. Hale is doing what the rest of us should have been doing all along, taking care of people who fall through the cracks." Other voices joined hers, not all of them friendly to Eliza, but unwilling to support Morrison's methods. The mob fractured, arguments breaking out among themselves about tactics and morality and whether they'd gone too far. In the chaos, Morrison and his core followers rode away, leaving behind a crowd that looked uncertain and uncomfortable. Tate dismissed them with a warning about disturbing the peace, and gradually people dispersed until only Eliza's allies remained. She stood on the porch, shaking with delayed fear and adrenaline. Coulter climbed the steps and pulled her into his arms. "You all right?" "No, but I will be." Sarah joined them, her expression fierce. "We're organizing, a group of women who support what you're doing. We'll take turns staying here, making sure no one tries anything when you're at the ranch." "You don't have to do that." "Yes, we do, because if Morrison can run you out, He can run any of us out. This isn't just about you anymore, Eliza. It's about all of us. The realization settled over Eliza slowly. She'd thought she was fighting alone, or at most with Coulter beside her. But somewhere along the way, without her noticing, she'd become part of something larger. A quiet resistance against the people who used righteousness as a weapon. Annie appeared in the doorway, her face pale but determined. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for not letting them take me." "No one's taking you anywhere," Eliza said firmly. "This is your home for as long as you need it." Over the following weeks, Harbor House began to take shape as more than just an idea. Annie stayed, helping with daily tasks and slowly healing from her trauma. 2 more women arrived, one fleeing an abusive husband, another whose family had disowned her for refusing an arranged marriage. The house filled with voices and life, transforming from an empty shell into a real home. The work was harder than Eliza had imagined. Each woman brought her own pain and complications. There were arguments and tears, setbacks and small victories. Some days Eliza felt completely overwhelmed, certain she'd bitten off more than she could chew. But there were good days, too. Days when laughter echoed through the halls, when one of the women learned a new skill or found the courage to smile again. When Grace toddled through the rooms, spreading joy with her innocent enthusiasm, reminding them all that children deserved better than the fear their mothers had known. Morrison continued his campaign against Harbor House, but his support was dwindling. Too many people had seen his mob tactics at the house. Too many had started asking uncomfortable questions about why he was so determined to punish women who'd already suffered enough. The turning point came in late January when one of the women staying at Harbor House, a quiet girl named Beth, gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Sarah and Eliza assisted with the delivery, and despite Beth's fear and pain, the baby came into the world squalling and perfect. Word spread through town faster than wildfire. A baby born at Harbor House. A bastard child, Morrison called it from his pulpit. But when people saw Beth with her son, saw the fierce protective love in her eyes, something shifted. Women started visiting Harbor House, tentatively at first. They brought gifts for the baby, blankets, clothes, small wooden toys. They stayed to talk, to help, to see for themselves what was really happening in Eliza's refuge. And what they found wasn't sin and corruption. It was tired women trying to build better lives. It was dignity earned through hard work. It was the kind of courage that came from having nothing left to lose. By February, Harbor House had become an established part of Red Hollow, whether Morrison liked it or not. The women who lived there helped each other, supported the ranch, even did sewing and laundry for townsfolk who were willing to pay fair wages. They proved they were more than their mistakes or their circumstances. They were survivors. One cold morning in March, Eliza stood at the window of Harbor House watching snow fall across the town. Behind her, Annie was teaching Beth to read while another woman mended clothes. Grace played on the floor with Beth's baby, both children babbling in their own incomprehensible language. The door opened and Coulter came in, stamping snow from his boots. "Got news," he said. "Good or bad? Depends on how you look at it. Morrison's leaving Red Hollow, taking a position at a church in Montana." Eliza turned to stare at him. "He's leaving?" "His congregation's been shrinking. Too many people disagreed with his methods. Board voted to ask for his resignation." Coulter smiled slightly. "Apparently standing with you has become the respectable position in town. Funny how that works." Eliza didn't feel triumphant. She felt exhausted and relieved and something close to sad. "I didn't want to drive him out. I just wanted him to leave us alone." Sometimes those amount to the same thing. That evening, as Eliza and Coulter rode back to the ranch, she found herself thinking about everything that had happened since that brutal summer day when she'd stepped off the train with nothing but fear and a baby. How much had changed? How much she'd changed? "Do you ever regret it?" she asked Coulter. "Taking me in that first day?" He was quiet for a moment, considering. "No, best decision I ever made." "Even with all the trouble it caused?" "Especially because of the trouble. The trouble forced me to figure out what I actually believed in. Turned out it wasn't what the town thought, it was you." The simple honesty of it made her throat tight. "I love you," she said. The words still felt new in her mouth, but she was learning to say them. "I love you too." They rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence. At home, they found Sarah watching Grace, who was finally starting to walk more than she fell. The little girl toddled toward Eliza with her arms outstretched, and Eliza scooped her up, breathing in the sweet scent of her daughter's hair. "Mama," Grace said clearly, her first real word. Eliza's eyes filled with tears. "That's right, baby, Mama." Spring came slowly to the frontier, but when it arrived, it brought new life with it. The women at Harbor House planted a garden. Beth's baby grew strong and healthy. Annie found work at the general store where the owner had decided that Harbor House residents were as good as anyone else's money. The woman fleeing her husband filed for divorce with papers Eliza helped her prepare, using resources from the inheritance that Samuel Drummond probably never imagined would be used to help women escape bad marriages. In April, another letter arrived from Howard Garrett. This one was different, formal, and congratulatory. Drummond's full estate had been settled, and Eliza had received even more than originally estimated. The total was enough to run Harbor House for years without financial worry, maybe even expand it to help more women. "What do you think?" she asked Coulter as they reviewed the numbers. "Should we make it bigger? Help more people?" "I think you should do whatever your heart tells you. My heart tells me a lot of contradictory things." He smiled. "Then we'll figure it out together, like everything else." They decided to expand slowly, adding rooms to Harbor House and establishing connections with other towns where women might need help. Word spread through networks that existed beneath the surface of polite society, networks of women who'd survived and wanted to help others do the same. By summer, Harbor House had helped 17 women. Some stayed long-term, building new lives in Red Hollow. Others moved on once they had resources and confidence. Each one carried a piece of Harbor House with her, proof that survival was possible, that community could be found even in the hardest places. On a warm evening in June, nearly a year after Eliza had first arrived in Red Hollow, she and Coulter hosted a gathering at the ranch. All the women from Harbor House came, along with Sarah and Chen, Sheriff Tate, and a dozen other allies they'd accumulated over the months. They roasted a pig, shared stories, watched Grace and the other children play in the grass. Thomas Brennan rode past on the road and saw them celebrating. He didn't stop, but Eliza saw something in his face that might have been grudging respect, or maybe just resignation that he'd lost this particular battle. Either way, it didn't matter. His opinion no longer had the power to hurt her. As the sun set and the party wound down, Eliza found herself standing at the edge of the property, looking out over land that had become home in ways she never expected. Coulter came to stand beside her, Grace asleep in his arms. "Thinking deep thoughts?" he asked. "Thinking about how strange life is. A year ago I was standing at that train station convinced my life was over. And now look!" She gestured at the scene behind them, friends talking and laughing, children sleeping in parents' arms, a community built on the ruins of her worst moment. "You built this," Coulter said, "from nothing but courage and stubbornness." "We built it. I couldn't have done any of it alone." "Maybe not. But you started it. You chose to stay and fight instead of running. That's what changed everything." Eliza thought about that, about all the moments she'd wanted to run, to disappear, to give up. But she'd stayed. Not because she was brave, but because running would have meant abandoning the tiny spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. "I'm glad I stayed," she said quietly. "So am I." They stood there as darkness fell, watching stars appear one by one in the vast frontier sky. Grace stirred in Coulter's arms but didn't wake. Inside the house, someone started playing a fiddle, and laughter rose into the night. Eliza realized then that this was what redemption looked like. Not a grand gesture or dramatic transformation, but small acts of courage repeated day after day. Choosing kindness when cruelty would be easier. Building community when isolation would be safer. Helping the next person who showed up desperate and afraid, because someone had once helped you. The following week brought another woman to Harbor House. This one barely 17, clutching a baby and looking exactly the way Eliza had looked a year ago. Terrified. Ashamed. Certain the world had nothing left to offer her. Eliza met her at the door and recognized herself in those frightened eyes. "Come in," she said gently. "You're safe here." The girl hesitated, as if waiting for the catch, the condition, the price she'd have to pay. "There's no catch," Eliza added, reading her mind. "Just come inside and rest. We'll figure everything else out later." The girl stepped across the threshold, and Eliza closed the door behind her, sealing out the judgment and fear. Inside, the other women gathered around, offering food and comfort, and the quiet assurance that survival was possible. As Eliza showed the girl to her room, she thought about the journey that had brought her here, about Samuel Drummond's betrayal that had seemed like the end but was actually the beginning, about Coulter's unexpected kindness that had taught her what real partnership looked like, about every closed door that had eventually led to Harbor House opening its doors to others. That night, lying in bed beside Coulter with Grace asleep in the next room, Eliza finally understood something fundamental about life. The worst moments don't ruin you. They reveal you. Strip away everything false until only truth remains. And if you're brave enough to face that truth, if you're willing to build something from the wreckage, those worst moments can become the foundation for something better than you ever imagined. "You're thinking loud again," Coulter murmured in the darkness. "Sorry." "Don't be. I like it when you think." He pulled her closer. "What's on your mind?" "That day at the station," she said, "when everything fell apart. I thought that was the worst thing that could happen to me. But it wasn't. It was the best thing disguised as the worst." "How so?" "Because it brought me here. To you, to Grace, to Harbor House, to a life I never could have imagined when I was trying to be someone I thought I should be." She turned to face him in the darkness. "I spent so long being ashamed of my choices, but my choices led me to this, and I wouldn't change any of it now." Coulter kissed her forehead. "That's growth, right there. Or insanity. Maybe both." They lay there in comfortable silence, and Eliza felt something settle inside her, a peace she'd been chasing her entire life without knowing it. She'd spent years running from judgment, from shame, from the fear of not being enough. But here in this rough frontier house with a man who chose her every day and a daughter who deserved better than fear, she'd finally stopped running. She'd found home. Not in a place, but in the choice to stop apologizing for surviving, in the decision to help others do the same, in the quiet, radical act of building something good from something broken. The years that followed brought their share of challenges. More women came through Harbor House, some left healed, others carrying wounds that might never fully close. The town's opinion shifted gradually from outright hostility to grudging acceptance to something approaching respect. New children were born. Grace grew into a fierce, confident girl who knew her own worth because her mother had learned to know hers. Coulter and Eliza's marriage deepened into the kind of partnership that becomes stronger under pressure, rather than fracturing. They fought sometimes, disagreed often, but always came back to the fundamental truth that they'd chosen each other when the world said they shouldn't. That choice, renewed daily, became the bedrock of everything they built. Harbor House expanded. They added a school where women could learn to read and write, a workshop where they could learn trades, connections with other towns and territories where women needed help. What started as one woman's desperate attempt to survive became a network of support that touched hundreds of lives. And through it all, Eliza never forgot what it felt like to stand alone on that train platform with nothing but fear and a baby. She remembered because each time a new woman arrived at Harbor House looking the way she'd once looked, she wanted to offer what she'd needed most, not pity, but partnership, not charity, but choice, not rescue, but the tools to rescue herself. On Grace's 10th birthday, as they celebrated at the ranch surrounded by friends who'd become family, Eliza watched her daughter laugh with the other children and felt overwhelming gratitude for the journey that had brought them here, for Samuel Drummond's cruelty that had set her free, for Coulter's kindness that had shown her what love really meant, for every closed door that had eventually led somewhere better. "You did good," Coulter said, appearing beside her with 2 glasses of lemonade. "We did good," she corrected. He smiled and clinked his glass against hers. "To doing good." "To doing good," she echoed. And as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the land they'd built a life on, Eliza understood that the greatest victories are often the quietest ones. Not dramatic reversals of fortune, but the steady accumulation of small acts of courage. Not changing the whole world, but changing your corner of it one person at a time. She'd arrived in Red Hollow expecting salvation from a man who'd abandoned her before she even arrived. Instead, she'd found something better, the strength to save herself and the wisdom to help others do the same. That was the real inheritance Samuel Drummond had left her, though he never could have known it. Not money or property, but the understanding that sometimes you have to lose everything to discover what you're actually made of. And what Eliza Hale was made of, it turned out, was exactly what Harbor House needed. Courage tempered by compassion. Strength born from suffering. The kind of grace that only comes from surviving the unthinkable and choosing kindness anyway. Years later, when people asked her how Harbor House began, she would always tell them the truth. It began with a woman standing alone at a train station, abandoned and afraid, facing a future that seemed impossible. It began with one person choosing to help instead of judge. It began with the radical idea that maybe, just maybe, the worst moments of our lives are actually invitations to become someone braver than we ever imagined. And it continued because some invitations are worth accepting, no matter how much they cost. Because building something good from something broken is the only revenge worth taking against a world that tried to break you. Because in the end, the best answer to cruelty is not more cruelty, but the stubborn insistence on creating spaces where kindness can flourish. Harbor House stood for decades after that first difficult year, helping generations of women who came through its doors carrying the same fear Eliza once carried. And each time a woman arrived desperate and alone, the women already there would gather around her with the same message Eliza had learned from Coulter all those years ago. You're not alone. You're not broken beyond repair. And you're worth fighting for, even when the whole world says otherwise. Especially then. That was Harbor House's legacy. Not just shelter and food, but the revolutionary idea that every person deserves a second chance, and that sometimes the people best equipped to offer that chance are the ones who've needed it themselves. As for Eliza, she lived the rest of her life with the quiet satisfaction of someone who'd taken her worst moment and transformed it into her finest achievement. Not because she was perfect or had all the answers, but because she'd been brave enough to keep going when stopping would have been easier. Because she'd chosen hope over bitterness, community over isolation, and love over fear. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.